Hello and welcome to an episode of FinTech Focus TV with a slightly croaky Toby here today, but fighting through it, and delighted to introduce you to Tamsin Hobley from Six. Tamsin, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, very well, thank you.
Listen, really excited to have you in here. Thanks for coming in. We've been talking about this for a little while.
Yeah.
I saw an article that you wrote about high performance cultures, high performance sales teams. I think the trendy Silicon Valley way of saying is it spoke to me.
Right.
But it's a subject that I absolutely adore, and I said, look, can you come in here and talk about it? I think you said something like, I thought you'd never ask. So delighted to actually have you in here today. So we're going to dive into that, all things high performance, all things culture.
Yeah.
One of my favourite subjects in the world. So really looking forward to this episode, and thanks for making the time for me.
Okay.
But let's start by the intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about the business.
Yeah, okay. So Tamsin Hobley, I have two roles. I am the country head, so the kind of head of the business in London for Six Group at the group level. And then I have another job, another hat, which, having had a long and extensive sales career and sales leadership career, I'm running our partners and channels globally at the moment.
Fantastic. When you mentioned before that Six is a company that goes back donkey's years in my career, but it's also a company there which I think is so huge on some level. Yeah. But also, one where some people haven't heard of before. So expand on it a little bit more as well.
Yeah. So Six Group. I mean, I think the best way of saying us, if you want to recognise immediately what we do, is we're an exchange group. Yeah. So we are the Swiss and the Spanish stock exchange, and recently acquired Aquis as well. And as part of that, we have four parts to our business. We've got the exchange part of our business, so that is obviously IPOs, listings, through to trading. And then we have our kind of post-trade business where we do custody, clearing and settlement. And then we've got our financial information business, which some people might know us as the old Telecos brand. And that's a global, not just Swiss, not just Spanish data, but a global financial information business. And then we have our very Swiss domicile business, which is our banking services. So we offer banking services to our Swiss clients. Yeah,
and a fantastic business, as you say. It's been... you mentioned Aquis there before. We spoke about Ultimus before we came on air. There's been a lot of acquisition recently as well. Yes, and that's part of the strategy. There's been. It
is, yeah. It's still organic growth. Yeah. There's big targets and objectives to meet there, but inorganic growth as well. Yeah. Where it makes sense. Yeah. So obviously, Ultimus is a great addition to us as a data business in ETFs, which is a massive growing asset class, and the services that they provide to their clients are brilliant. Yeah. We love Aquis. Yeah. We love ETFs, and that
we all do, don't we?
Yeah. And that coincides nicely with our ETF. With 25 years in the ETF business on our exchange side of the business, so it's a nice kind of ecosystem. Yeah. From the kind of issuance to the actual servicing the ETF community as well. And then if you look at Aquis, that gives us access to not just being a Swiss and a Spanish player, but actually thinking about more of pan-European 16 market business. So.
And it's evolved over time, and we're going to be talking a little bit about change in a minute, and cultural shifts and cultural changes and amalgamation and integration of businesses, all stuff which we're going to come into. But let's talk about that sort of headline piece of high performance culture. So I think high performance culture is something which gets trotted out a lot in leadership speak, and everyone talks about having a high performance culture. Yeah. I'm not 100% sure everyone who says they've got a high performance culture lives and breathes it every single day. Mm-hmm. And I think definition comes down to an important part of that. How would you define a high performance culture?
First of all, there's definite stats about, how a high performance culture can affect profitability and revenue, basically. And I think that if you have a high performance culture, whatever that looks like, it can basically increase revenues by 2.5% and increase margin by about 21%. So, there's facts and figures. But I think when you just look at the numbers, then that's great. But actually, it's actually about the culture. you know. So, you know, for me, what's really important with a high performance culture is actually the culture part, you know. So I think engaged people is what we're all looking for, right? And I think that, you know, if you have an engaged workforce, I think the average engagement of a company is about 30%.
Yeah, I know, it's phenomenal.
But if you have a high performance culture, that can go up to over 80 if you have, you know, a diverse and inclusive culture within your company. And I think that helps with staff turnover. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all about retaining our talent and growing our talent. You know, we don't get the return on investment if they're going out the door, if we're not giving them that kind of high performance mindset. So, you know, you're more likely to retain your staff by about, I think it's about 40%. You probably know better than I do. If you have a high performance culture.
Well, look, there's some really interesting stats that you talk about there as you're going through that. I think about the sort of Gartner numbers on the level of engaged people in workforces across the world at the moment, and it's moving back at a phenomenal rate, and it's, you know, you mentioned 30% there. It's mad to me about just how small a proportion of workforce people are actually sat there. Although not surprising, because you think about how many people sort of, you know, have the thank God it's Friday sort of stuff and all that sort of Sunday night dread. It's a common sort of phenomenon, and one which I think is you know, basically built on the fact that people are not thinking about how they can create a culture that people want to be a part of. I think about our recent candidate survey that we've done, where 89% of those surveyed, our highest ever number, we're talking about moving jobs in the next year.
Blimey.
Which is, you know,
that's shocking.
Well, if you think about 9 out of 10 of your team were to leave next year, across everyone,
we'd have a massive problem.
You know, then that's almost untenable as a business. If you think about in engineering globally, 18 months is the average tenure of an engineer these days, which is, you know, if you can increase that twofold, there's a massive win in that sort of play. And it's not cheap to return or to replace them. You think of the IP that leaves. So I think it's a massive piece. And I think that sort of concept, as you say, look, the statistics there of changing and building high performance cultures are incredibly important to driving every single one of those statistics further forward. The question is, and you mentioned how do you do it, but also what it looks like. So you mentioned there before, I think your wording was what it, you know, how high performance or whatever that looks like to you. And I guess it is subjective a little bit.
It is, and I guess
it
depends.
It to you?
Well, for me, I mean, we've done a lot of work with our leadership team. We've looked at high performance because I think we are a high performing kind of business, you know.
100%.
But I think that, you know, at the end of the day, the world has changed and evolved a lot, and jobs are becoming a bit more transactional. So the culture part is super important. In order to, you know, get that engagement. So, and I think that when I looked about, you know, we thought long and hard. We did like a brainstorming session, and we kind of like looked at, you know, what is it that we think high performance culture is. And I think that there's different angles. So for me, I think that, you know, expertise over hierarchy. You know, we actually want to really shout out and acknowledge the expertise that we've got, and actually make them feel incredibly valued and that they have a voice. I think the other thing is, you know, looking at kind of like problem solving and ownership of those problems at every level. You know? So
the accountability piece.
Totally, because like, that's how people learn, that's how people grow, but actually that's what makes you go, like, you know, if you're just like passing off your problems to everyone else, you know, I think that's the best way of, like, you know, learning and growing, and that's what motivates our staff, and feeding into that continuous learning and feedback is super important as well. But I think for me, one of the most important things, and this is a bit like, you know, but psychological safety. So actually giving people the security and the safety to have a voice, to have ideas, to take risks, to make decisions. You know, because I think that that's what most of our staff, when we look at the people who do leave sick, and we survey them, we question them and what have you, most of them will say that they love the culture and they love the fact that they have a voice and they can challenge and I've really encouraged this, you know, challenge, scrutinise, you know, don't just accept that that's the way we do things. you know, we want you to say, why do we do it like that? Because sometimes we're immune to it because we've done it like that for so long. You know, this is where we need the fresh outside-in views, the fresh talent to look at things. So that's something I always encourage, particularly our younger talent, you know, to like we give them business problems and we say, this is a problem. What do you think about it?
I think that's so important. And actually, there's an interesting thing which I don't know if you acknowledge that you did, but when you were there and you talked about psychological safety, it was almost like an embarrassed way of saying that that's part of the.
But I think it's a forgotten thing.
Because I truly believe this is part of the issue, right? Where people look at that sort of thing and see it as a woolly aspect. Yeah. But when you've got people in there, I think particularly in this industry, you know, in the financial services space, there's a lot of pressure on it, and we've seen a lot of churn, particularly since 2008. One of the things that's made it more of a transactional career is that people have seen cuts come and you know, things ramp up at various stages, cuts come back, and it's become impersonal. Yeah. And the relationship between, you know, if you go back to the years of you know, carriage clocks and 25 years service, you haven't seen that quite so much over recent years. So re-establishing that bond by creating that safety, where, you know, I would say the phrase that's come up, the quote that's come up more than anything else since we started doing this show was the IBM quote about no one's ever been fired for hiring at IBM. I think there's decisions that get made in financial services that is halted by people worrying about whether it's going to be anything that impacts their career. Yeah. And actually, the businesses that I've really admired, yourselves included, is where that sort of, you know, ability for people to make those decisions, to be back to make those decisions, to not have fingers pointed out and have a sort of self-preservation aspect to it. I think it's a fundamental cornerstone of high performance around it. Yeah.
No, 100% agree, and I think this is, you know, we people have to take risk, and so I remember actually way back in my early career, way back when I worked for a retail bank, and I had what I thought was a brilliant idea around how we could increase, I think it was marketing and sales, like it was something related to that anyway, and I remember my manager at the time, he kind of gave me a bit of an odd look, but he said, yeah, go for it. You know, he knew I was going to fail. Yeah. He knew it was not going to land, you know, with all the teams. Yeah. It was a Tamsin kind of like, you know, wacky idea that was not going to be successful. And I failed miserably. But he needed me to fail in order to learn, you know, and I always think back to that moment where I thought, God, he knew I wasn't going to be successful at this, but he let me do it anyway. He took a risk, because he knew that I was going to be so much better and learn so much more, much quicker by doing it. And I think that that's what I've always kind of thought, you know, with any people that I've managed, any teams, you know, sometimes you have to let them take the risk and fail. And
I think it's important then once they've done that's not
within some guidelines, obviously.
But also then not being held, you know, I mean, held to account, but not being vilified for that sort of play as well. And I think that's a really important part of it. And I imagine that's something you've then taken on to allow people to try.
I mean, as I say, I mean, it's not like you want them to fail, but I think, you know, as I say, with guidelines and with some safety measures, you know, some safety bars and all that kind of thing. But, you know, and particularly in the sales environment, you know, sometimes they need to find their own style. They can't just always, you know, he's done it that way, therefore I'm going to do the same, because it doesn't land really well in the sales environment. You've got to have your own natural style. So you kind of see people try things out, and I think they should try things out. You know, and finally they'll find their way.
Find the path alongside it. I think that, you know, you mentioned there about the sort of how, and you know, I think everyone's got aspirations of high performance environments, and as I said before, people will say it because that's where they want to, you know, it's kind of like we'll write on the wall and we'll become it. Without the strategy then to come into, you know, come alongside that. I think you've obviously put a lot of thought. You've brought people together. You've had involvement in the whole process. You've brainstormed. You've workshopped, etc., etc. Tell us that sort of journey for you of how the business is. You know, I guess there's always been a sort of you know, connectivity that sits as a high performance environment anyway. But what's been the ingredients that you've been able to put in to maintain that? Because I think it's quite easy to slip at various stages, isn't it?
It is.
There and you've got that brand and that name. There's gradual erosion in a number of different companies at that sort of stage. But I feel like you guys have been very good at reinvention, very good at sort of moving further forward, very good at pushing that further as well.
I think being nimble and being able to pivot is a strength.
Yeah.
I think listening to our people, listening to our staff, and listening to our customers is also super important.
Yeah.
But I think actually, if we're talking about high performance, getting back onto that topic, goal setting is super important, right? People, if they don't write a good, structured, clear, measurable, smart goal, they're probably not going to be successful.
Yeah.
I think there's like some stats around, if you actually write a goal down at the start of the year or whenever your period is, you're 40% more likely to achieve it or overachieve it, and you're going to be about 3.5 times more engaged. Yeah. So why would it be any different when I'm wanting to implement a high performance culture? We set ourselves goals as leadership teams, and we keep on coming back to those, and we keep on going, how are we measuring up? Yeah. So yes, you can have slippage, but not if you keep on coming back to what the goals were, and probably realigning them as you go. So I think that continuous feedback is super important.
Yeah. I was speaking to someone yesterday who I've known for a long time. He's been an industry veteran, although I don't think you probably want to be called that. But I've known him for a long, long time. Fantastic guy, and he was talking about his sales team and looking to do some building out of it. And he talked about the sales leader role, which he's looking to fill,
right?
And spoke about the significance of forecasting.
Yeah.
So when you talk about goal setting, etc., generally we're talking about sales numbers, etc., within that. And he said that the critical part of the one of the critical parts of a sales leader's role is to accurately forecast. And I think it's something which people really struggle with at the same sort of stage. What's aspirational enough, but not. Within that, how do you go around that sort of process?
I mean, I think your CRM has to be. You need to be. Live and breathe. I think actually getting to the point where the CRM is the first thing you do. Yeah. And you are looking at all of your kind of like pipeline and your opportunities and actually measuring them. I think it comes with experience a little bit. When we get new salespeople, they're going, this is going to close. It's going to close in a month, and we all know that's not going to happen.
You get the nod.
I think there's no perfect way of doing it, and I've spoken to many companies about this, and everyone goes, well, this works really well, that doesn't, but it's also down to the individuals and the sales leader as well, and how they want to do it. But I think clearly data is super important when we all have to report up our figures and numbers. But you're going to have things change, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So like
market shift.
Yeah, market shift. Companies get bought. The CEOs leave, or your purchaser leaves, or your main technical sponsor leaves, etc. There's delays on their side because there's an end client dependent on it, or whatever. Things change. So I think accurate CRM is really important, but for me, filling a bucket is actually more important. So when I encourage my sales team, I said you almost treat this like your own business. So here's your quota, here's your target, etc. But you've got to think about what's your your early, your medium, your long, and you've got to be moving them through the pipeline, and nurturing that pipeline is super important. If you're just concentrating on 2 or 3 big deals, you're not going to be successful. So it's not just about the accuracy, it's about always having something to fill the leaky bucket. And I think that is kind of like where we've been successful, because dusting yourself off and picking yourself up and moving on and nurturing, keeping in contact with all of your pipeline is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there beforehand, one of the core parts of all this is engagement, one of the most concerning stats, and you talked about how that can improve by up to 80% if you're doing the right sort of things. So you guys have generally been very good, I think, for within the engagement piece of things, and having an engaged workforce, which, as you said, drives retention there afterwards alongside that. Yeah. Tell us some of the sort of the secret sauce that you've been able to sort of build with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's various different things when it comes to engagement, and I think it's down to good leadership. I think number one, transparent communication, consistent communication, making sure your staff are well informed with what you can tell them. I like the sort of chair approach. This is where where we are and this is what I can tell you right now type of thing, you know. So I think that helps, you know, because then people feel safe, you know, going back to the psychological safety, you know, they feel safe because they're informed of what's going on, particularly in times of change. And I think then the other thing is actually, you know, people need a purpose, right? So, you know, if you're coming to work, what is it that's motivating our staff? What Six have always been really good at is the culture. You know, it's the family feel. You know, we're a big organisation, but we also, you know, like our staff to feel that we're all part of a family, you know. So I think, and we talked about hearts and minds as well. I think the social side is super important. You know, we work in a matrix organisation, so we've got people in London that might not have a manager in London, or might not have anyone else in their team in London. They may be completely in a different location. So we would still make sure that they're not alone. So I think social groups within an organisation are super important. So they've got their little communities. I think socialising together is really important.
I agree.
I think I could go on because there's just loads of stuff. You know, we've done a lot around kind of like the cultural, like when I took over as country head, you know, we weren't so good at the cultural side in London. It needed a bit of oomph into it, and that's something we've really focused on. We've put a lot of effort into learning and development.
Talk to me about what that looks like, because you mentioned that earlier, and I wanted to jump in on
learning
that as well.
and development,
because I think it's there's an interesting thing, particularly with salespeople. You know, when you put them into that, they all talk about. You know, in an exit interview, they might talk about not having enough learning and development. When you put it onto salespeople in particular, it's like, I could be outselling at the moment, and this is good. So it's an interesting sort of thing when, and maybe this is actually about the design of the people you're talking about. I think everyone who wants to improve will invest all the amount of time they can to get into getting better. But I find it's quite interesting that it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, and you've got to make sure that training is absolutely valuable and on point. So how do you develop?
I mean, we have a kind of like rule that 70% is on the job, 20% is kind of like maybe through coaching or mentoring, you know, or sponsorship, etc. And then 10% is like external courses or you know, certifications or things like that.
Absolutely.
So we look at the 10%. You know, we use our apprenticeship levy to the maximum. We look at how we invest, you know, how we can be clever and creative, you know, to give our staff additional things to put on their resume, you know, that gives them some kind of like accreditation, you know, but also is good for the business as well, you know. So, you know, we've sponsored a couple of masters recently, you know, but they've been brilliant masters, you know, for what their job.
MBA piece or
not MBA so much, but actual masters. And then we do a lot of like FISD qualifications and things like that. So we that's the 10%. The 20%, you know, we've set up an ecosystem around peer group coaching and mentoring, you know, and actually, you know, non-peer groups. So there's a lot around coaching and mentoring that's going on. And we're able to do that in London because we've got 180 plus staff now, growing when Aquis kind of like come together with us,
absolutely.
Which is about another 130, 140 staff. So we've got a huge amount, very senior people in London, a huge amount of knowledge and expertise. And I think I said expertise over hierarchy. Forget the hierarchy. You know, we can match up a junior person with a senior person if there's a specific thing that they want to learn about, and it might be. I always think coaching and mentoring is two ways.
But I mean, it does definitely work both ways, doesn't it? If you think about the speed of change in technology at the moment, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone who's been in the industry for 30 years has more experience than someone who's been in the industry for 3 years around a specific area. And I think when you've got people in there who are looking to learn bottom up as well as top down, it can become a really exciting environment there, can't it?
We actually had, one of the our young talent that we actually sponsored for him to do a master's, which was on kind of AI and technology, and he's come back and I said, look, can you present to the leadership team? I think it'd be great to hear what you've done. And we had some quite senior people in the room who are looking to put in AI and bots and things like that. And he was talking about, he'd used real life Six problems as part of his thesis, and how he'd used, technology, and like his rates, his quality rates were better than what we're doing. And we're building from scratch, and he was using different things, and we were like, it was actually meant to be like, you know, have we got the money, the value for our money? But actually it was a complete learning moment for us.
And, that's brilliant though,
and you know, a senior like operations person basically said, I'm going to sponsor you to get this in our innovation hub because we need to learn from this, you know? So that's the kind of thing where actually we've got to bring those kind of fresh ideas. And as I say, everything's a learning moment at the moment, you know. Sitting down with him for 10 minutes, I came away with far more knowledge on AI, you know, than some other people were telling me, you know. So I think those kind of things, and that's all part of culture as well. I think, you know, having that, you know, giving him the platform to present in front of 20 senior leaders in London. You know, he was nervous, but it gave him the platform, and what
a great feeling afterwards. And things. I'm so particular with the feedback from
you know, and there were lots of takeaways and follow-up. So
I think that's really important, actually. The thing you just mentioned there about culture, because I think sometimes people think about culture as to, you know, what you do as a, you know, forced fun, so to speak, organised fun. And actually, you know, I mentioned before we've done the top 1% workplace awards, and it's been sort of 6-7 years of speaking to people every single year and spending 10-15 minutes with them talking about why they're a great place to work. And I feel that evolves every single year with various different focuses. And if I go back pre-pandemic, and even during the pandemic, pre-pandemic it was all about, we're doing this, we've got this off-site, we've got this sort of thing. That's what they felt was a culture. And it was, you know, it probably sort of coincides with the table tennis table and all those sort of, you know, the bean bags and all that sort of stuff. That never gets spoken about now. In the pandemic, it was all about how we were doing, you know, online quizzes and socials and all this sort of stuff to keep people engaged and all that sort of stuff. Now I think there's a lot of engagement about having, you know, that education and that development piece, that communication piece that people talk about, the ability to be surrounded by world-class people, left and right of you.
Can they learn?
And absolutely.
And can we give back?
Exactly. And then also, you mentioned purpose beforehand, and I think purpose in this industry comes a lot about the challenge and the problems you're solving. And I think, yeah, this is something I struggled with for a long time. You know, I mentioned before I love sort of sport, business, military when it comes to high performance and how you can take lessons from all. In military and sport, you've got a very clear purpose, and everyone talks about, right, you know, the Kevlar jacket story and how, you know, you're there to put NASA, you're there to put a man on the moon, you're saving lives or whatever it is. In our world, you're not necessarily always saving lives. You haven't got that sort of thing, that anchor piece. But I think when you're able to articulate something you guys are doing and give that sort of genuine purpose.
And that's the thing, it's looking at that high level strategy at the group level, down to a business unit, then down to a function level, and then actually how can they contribute? And that comes down to good goal setting as well. So like, you know, and what I do in my town halls at the start of the year, I have all the business units, we talk about what our high level goals are, but we have location goals. And we basically say, here are 4 location goals, and it could be around growth, it could be around people and culture, it could be around ESG and sustainability, et cetera, but 4, maybe 5 clear kind of like almost towers, and we say just pick one and think about what you can do to contribute to that.
Love that.
You know, and that means that people then align to the local strategy that fits into the, you know, the function strategy which fits into the business unit, and then, you know, because it kind of like flows. So I think, and we did a lot of work on kind of like our strategy. Year before, was it no, I think last year actually. Time's flying. And you know, actually, what our purpose is, why we're doing what we're doing, and the reason we're doing it, and then how people can identify with that, and then down to their own individual purpose. So, you know, I think going back to the goal setting, that is part of the strategy and part of the culture as well. Because if you're setting goals that aren't actually aligned with the business,
it doesn't necessarily help, does it?
And I don't think you get the engagement then.
Well, that's
because they don't see the impact they're having.
I think that sort of personal attachment to the public good, as well as, you know, is the thing. When you've got those goals and you've got those things, what's in it for me is sometimes under communicated. So what does it mean? Where's that might take you? Where's it go? Where's it in line with your thing? I think when people are really working on how they can tie ththose into the individual, and what that means for the individual, that becomes an important part of it too.
But it's also understanding, you know, customers. The other tower is always customer, right?
Of course,
So it's actually thinking about, ultimately, what it is you do that services our customers. So actually getting down to that. My son's actually going to start working for us. He's just graduated in physics from Bristol, and it's tough out there. He wants to get into quantum analysis, but he needs to get some experience. So he's going to start working. And we were talking about the job role that he's going to do, which is like a data licensing specialist. And I said, this is going to be really important for you because you're going to understand how all the exchanges and data flows through the industry. But I said, but what you're doing, the reason you're doing this job is because ultimately this is going to serve the customers by doing this and making sure that they're compliant with all the data licensing and they're set up correctly, et cetera, so that they're not at risk of an audit. They're going to get data on time, licensed correctly, et cetera. And then I thought, does the rest of the team that he's joined know that? So it's going down to what that means to the end client, So
it's really important. That exactly as you're talking through there, and it suddenly makes you think about it and say.
And I then thought, I hope the rest of the team that he's working with, know what it is that they're doing and how it's benefiting the client.
You can use him as the mole now to do that. Spread the gospel.
So
You mentioned change, etc. as well, and acquisitions are a really interesting part.
Yes, yeah.
And you've had a couple
in London particularly. I mean, most of the acquisitions, a lot of the acquisitions have been, their headquarters like Ultimus and Aquis, obviously, London based. They have other locations as well, but predominantly their leadership teams in London. So that's had a big impact on my location.
Absolutely. And when you talk about both of those businesses, they are and have built. Ultimus, it was founder-driven, big character, etc. Coming into an organisation.
You need to get him on your.
He's been on. You can dig that story out. But he's going to come back again as well. Fantastic character, fantastic business that seems to have gone from strength to strength. Aquis, we were talking off camera beforehand. What I've always loved about Aquis is they're just a phenomenal culture. I've always thought that. I've always banged the drum of it. I think they've got great people. And you can always tell an Aquis person. So when you look at those sort of businesses, there are companies there that have thrived because of their, and you spoke about Alistair as well. Thrived because of their founders, thrived because of the culture, thrived because of the people which they move into that. And there are a lot of companies who go through acquisition processes and get that wrong and lose that sort of story. I know you're very deliberate around this, and I've really thought.
Well, we've
about
learned, in fairness,
which is important. So tell us what you have learned in that.
Well, I guess we acquired Ultimus during the pandemic, and then we started to come back to the office, and they started to come back to the office. I don't think, and it was the first company that we hadn't. 100%. Well, we 100% acquired them, but we were going to keep them as what we call a light integration because we wanted them to keep their brand, we wanted them to keep their nimbleness and their creativity and their innovation, and not be part of a big, FMI that's regulated, and then put all the governance, security, and risk kind of oversight onto them. We didn't want to stifle them and suffocate them. But I think we kind of because it was a light integration, the first one we did, we hadn't really thought about that cultural alignment. And I think it's safe to say, and I'm sure Bernie would agree with me, that we had some teething issues. Because, their culture was maybe very different to our culture.
It's natural.
Yeah, exactly. And we hadn't actually thought about that as part of the integration. That's part of, the operational M&A team, etc. It hadn't really been sort of thought of. So we were kind of having issues and finding our feet. And I would say 100% now we're culturally aligned. We're all in the same office. We all socialise together. We all, Bernie and I, take the mick out of each other constantly. I'm not sure if I can swear. I was going to say something different. It's fine. It's great. But it took us a while to get there. It wasn't easy during the pandemic as well. So, we've had a couple of other acquisitions, Factory 3, is another one that we've, smaller team, but, we kind of knew what we needed to do in terms of cultural integration. And then obviously Aquis is a much bigger organisation, and we've done exactly the same. It's a light integration.
I think you recognise that sort of culture as being...
100%. So, and it's really easy to get into the kind of the nitty-gritty and the operation of if we moved in, I still want my desk and I still want this, and so it was kind of like, hang on, the hearts and minds are super, super important, and they're not going to be moving into our office yet. There'll be some transition of people coming over, but it was actually about, before that happens, we need to learn about each other, and we need to look at the cultural differences and the cultural alignment, and actually the more we discussed it, the more we realised that actually it's not going to be a problem, because we're actually quite similar. They've got a chess club, we've got a chess club, etc., etc. But we've actually started doing some social events together. But I think with Aquis, it's the heart and minds. It was like, how can we socialise together and learn about each other's businesses and actually get the people to align? So we've done the Aquis Sports Day. We actually mixed up the teams. It was still highly competitive, a lot of fun.
Do we have a winner, can you say?
Well, we had like a mixed team.
Okay,
it was a mixed team that won. But I mean, like, even then, like, the competitiveness between the mixed teams. And then, so we've actually now joined the social committees together. So we're looking to do a mutual event once a quarter, and the social committees are joining up, and they're going to be planning that. And then we've looked at the kind of like, they're holding all their IPO events in the 6 offices now. They're holding a lot of their client events in the 6 offices. So we're starting to, it's kind of like baby steps. But I think that's where we're going to be far more successful, when eventually we're all in the same home together.
But it also makes sense, doesn't it? If you think from if you start as a leader in a business, I think the temptation is to come in and rip everything up and do
not at all. They retain their brand, they retain their culture.
And I think if you're sat there and you take the same process. I remember I went into a business as in a senior role many years ago, and they said don't do anything for the first 3 months, and I was sat on my hands, desperate to to change things at that stage, and actually realised there were certain things that that you wanted to do that wouldn't have worked well at that sort of stage.
But we don't need to change them; they're incredibly successful.
Exactly.
That's the reason we've got
that sort of light acquisition piece. About, stopping, looking at that, recognising that sort of thing as well becomes really important in the whole process.
Well, it's like I said, I think I said earlier, they're a speedboat, and 6 is more like a tank ship, a freight carrier or whatever.
Drop it off the back,
so like we want to culturally align, but the businesses sometimes need to be slightly separate so that they can continue doing what they do brilliantly.
Absolutely. So to summarise. Let's talk about high performance cultures, high performance sales teams, high performance leadership teams, high performance cultures. If you're there to encapsulate everything we've just spoken about and say that this is some of the things you think are critically important to it, how would you summarise that in a
I think strong leadership with great, consistent, clear communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think giving that psychological safety and allowing people, it's a word that we all use in terms of like, empowerment and what have you, but you need to live and breathe that, to be honest with you. Giving them the opportunity to take risks, to challenge, to scrutinise, and actually feel confident to do that and safe to do that. And then clear goal setting. I think that's super important at every level, and at every level allowing people to be successful.
I like those pillars that you were talking around there as well. And you're thinking about what those are actually attainable and how they mean, and what they're and where people fit into that whole thing is incredibly important. I could be speaking about this for hours.
I had so much more I was going to cover.
That might be part 2.
Yeah, we'll have to do part 2. Maybe we'll do sales performance.
Yeah, there we go. That's the next thing. I have got an idea about that, which I'll talk to you afterwards. But let's do the final piece on this will be coming out at the start of 2026.
Right.
So let's do the final piece around what you're looking forward to in 2026. What can we expect to see? What's exciting?
Yeah, I mean, like 6 are going through a massive transformation at the moment. So every day is like something new, which I love. I love change. But I think that for me in 2026, because we're going through a lot of change, it's about making sure my staff are, my teams, our leadership team, their staff are actually, dealing with the change that we're going through. And I think that, a sign of a good leader is how you manage people through a change curve. So that for me is the biggest goal for me, my team in 2026 is like, how do we go through this transformation together without losing staff and all highly motivated and engaged?
Absolutely love it. Listen, thanks so much for coming on the show.
I loved it.
As we said, we could have been going on for a long, rattling on for a long time. We're going to do sales performance. I'll talk to you about that in a second.
Yeah.
People want to find out a little bit more about your philosophy on high performance, how they can be part of the team, how they can reach out. What's the best way for them to find you?
Just link in with me,
there we
basically.
Go. Easy as.
Absolutely.
Tamsin, lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming, and thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on the next episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.